Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast, everyone. I am Sarah, alone today. No Seth. He is on a well-deserved vacation this week. But without further ado, step away from your dinner tables or wherever you're listening because today we are tackling the ultimate dining room and boardroom conversation taboo: politics. And if you're worried that we might get into uncomfortable territory, fear not. Not only will we be discussing potential business impacts of the upcoming US presidential election, but also immigration policy and international conflicts, just for good measure. As Seth mentioned last week, government and politics, really more broadly, is often an overlooked element of the business of travel. But actions of government have the ability to move and shape markets just as much, if not more, than business or technological developments. Think the COVID lockdowns, visa restrictions, and short term rental regulation. So it's with all that in mind that we've invited Skift's managing editor, Lex Harris, back to the program to help us work through the implications of the quickly changing global political climate on the business of travel. Hey, Lex, how you doing?
Hey, very good, Sarah.
Excellent. So, a quick reminder before we get started to send any questions or comments that you may have to us at podcasts@skift.com. And please don't forget to follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching. And if you're enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars or leave us a little positive review so we can spread the word about this Skift Travel Podcast. All right, Lex. So let's start in the United States of America. The presidential election's coming up in just over a month, and that's likely going to impact everything, I guess, the broader economic policies like taxes, like inflation control, like stimulus, which can all affect consumer travel spending, which, of course, is the bread and butter of most everyone listening to us right now. So, what are your expectations for how these factors are going to shape both domestic and international travel demand? Let's cut right to it.
Yeah, there. Well, there's no. Yes, I mean there is so much in what you were just getting at, right? I think that the biggest one that we're seeing is taxes. That's where when you really listen to what Trump is saying and really listen to what Harris is saying, that's the biggest divide. And in short, Trump wants to continue the taxes. You know, he cut taxes a lot during his first term, and he wants to do that and do more of it. Harris wants to keep a lot of those tax cuts in place for, say, if you're earning less than $400,000 a year, but has a series of measures for everyone above that. And so
Right.
that's everything from a minimum tax for billionaires, higher taxes on capital gains, which is getting at investments, taxes on stock buybacks, all of which would, you would feel it. And especially in
Yeah.
an environment, Sarah, and we've talked about it so much, everyone's going after the premium traveler. Everyone's going after rich people. When I say going after them, I mean the travel industry trying to court
Yeah.
those customers. And so
Yep.
here are policies directly going at that market. But let me say this before I go too far going into the policies, right? One of the reasons the stock market has, since when was I here last? So early August, we had a markets freak out, right?
Yes.
Since
Yes.
then, stock market has gone straight up, right?
Gangbusters.
Gangbusters.
Yes.
All during a time when everyone was saying, oh my God, we're going to have volatility around the election. Everyone's freaking out about the election. We're going to be scared. There was no volatility. No one's
Yeah.
worried. The only thing I can think of about why that is the expectation of divided government, right? So
Mm.
let me say this, Sarah. If Trump did everything he said he was going to do, tariffs, et cetera, if Harris does everything she says she's going to do, taxes, et cetera, these things could hurt growth, could hurt the consumer, could have impact on the travel industry. But the thinking is divided government, the Senate, House, is going to be of the opposite party to the White House. They're not going to get to do everything they want to do.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I am on that.
And it's also really interesting. We're in actually a unique situation that
Mhm.
we've never had in the history of American government. Somebody fact check me on this.
Mhm.
I'm sure you'll write in and let me know. We have two parties where we kind of know what they would actually do.
Yeah.
We have a Republican candidate that had one term in the White House, a Democratic candidate who is the current sitting vice president. So we've got a little bit of a, I don't know, a little bit of a window into what these two might actually do, apart from what they say on the campaign trail. There's a lot of promises that are made, and a lot of things that are said that we kind of know from experience does they don't always get put into practice, especially because of what you just said, divided government, how they handle the other party, what they're handed from Congress. But this time we kind of do know a little bit more. So what do you think, so most of our listeners out there right now are people working in travel industry, insiders, executives. If you're them, how
Right.
are you preparing for either a Trump administration or a Harris administration?
Yeah. I mean, well, so first off, let me say the Skift team listens very closely to earnings calls, right?
Right.
And so
Yep.
just a few months ago, we had all of the earnings reports and we put the earnings transcripts through things where we could say, how many times did they talk about
Yeah.
the
I
election, et
love that
cetera?
one.
They're not talking about it that much. And so
Right.
usually you will hear things like, we're gonna work with whatever administration. They have their wish list. I was going through the hotel industry's wish list. They want to ensure a workforce, those
Hmm.
kinds of types of measures. Um, but they're trying to really stay out of politics. So how are they preparing? I mean, they're lobbying. In this case that I was just talking about, one of the things is around visas for workers, for example. If you're the
Right.
hotel industry, that's a really important one. None of them want corporate taxes to go up, right? They are very happy with that measure under the first Trump administration. If they go up from 21 to 28%, is it going to be a disaster? No. That's where the tax rates were before, and we had perfectly fine economic growth. But those are the types of things they're lobbying for and against in trying to ensure a stable workforce, ensuring lower taxes. That's what they're fighting for right now.
So let's
Mm-hmm.
let's kind of push in a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
into immigration and immigration
Mm-hmm.
policies. So U.S. immigration and visa policies both have a huge impact on both business and leisure travel. We just had a big piece from our colleague Payton who talked about, how loosening of visas, especially in Asia, are really a boon for that part of the
Yeah.
world. How do you think this next administration here in the United States is going to approach immigration? How is that going to affect international travel to the US? I mean, I would be remiss not to remind about how, we even had travel bans during the
Yeah.
previous Trump administration. So, put on your prognostication hat, like from each administration. What's that going to do to inbound travel to the US?
Mm-hmm. Look, I mean, so there's two pieces to the immigration thing, right? So there's visas and there's just a steady flow of travel, which without we want a steady flow of travel, right? So that was
Right.
one of the important pieces of Peden's report was that countries that want more tourists, that want more travelers, are trying to reduce restrictions. The other piece is about the workforce. But so let's
Right.
just talk about visas for now. So it is true that under the Trump administration, visa issuance came down. There was increased vetting. There was increase. It's hard to isolate exactly what was going
Right.
on, but the numbers are the numbers. In fact, I have them in front of me. they went from they went from over 6 million to just over 5 million. I mean, so the number of visa issuance went down throughout the Trump administration. Then, backing out COVID, where everything plunged. But then under Biden, they've been really taking the issue seriously and really stepping up efforts to issue visas. And that encourages more visitation.
Right.
Um, the travel bans were very targeted, very problematic, but from a pure travel perspective, didn't affect the numbers because they were mostly targeting countries that
Yeah.
weren't
Huge. Yeah. Hugely
weren't
sending,
yeah,
inbound tourists to the
they weren't
United
in the
States.
top
Right.
20 source markets for the US.
Right.
So, but I think he's come out very publicly and said he's going to do that again.
Yeah.
Um, would he, what I hear, what you weren't hearing a lot back then about the importance of visa issuance. You are hearing that when you hear people from the Biden Harris administration talk about it. They take the issue very seriously. The travel industry pushes for that very
Yeah.
strongly. And they very much have heard it. And they, when you hear tourism officials talk about it, they acknowledge it and they're working hard to grease the wheels on visa issuance.
So what about the workforce? Let's take part two.
It's a problem. I mean, it's I understand, I'm the reason you hear caution in my voice is because it's such a sensitive issue. And no
Yeah.
one and everyone has kind of come around to the idea of like you have to have some order to who's entering the country. I get it. But there's where is growth for the US going to come from? You either need to have higher productivity or a higher workforce. The only place, given demographics, that a workforce is going to come from is increased immigration. One of the quiet stories that happened over the past year was a big increase in the workforce, and specifically a big increase in the immigrant workforce, and that's been a net positive both for inflation uh, and general output within the country. Both sides now are talking about reducing that and putting and cracking down, and that can be a net
Yeah.
negative to growth.
So no matter what, we are going to have a new president come sometime in November, knock on wood here. So what is that going to mean for the regulatory environment? Particularly, we've got issues like environmental policies, labor laws, aviation regulations, M&A, and of course our favorite, junk fees. Um, what do you see as the specific areas in the regulatory framework that each of these administrations could enact that either would help or be to the dismay of the travel industry?
A big part in 2016 of the Trump agenda was reducing regulations, right? He was
Yeah,
very clear about it. So it was
yep,
lower taxes, lower regulation was the pro growth stuff. Crackdown on immigration was the not pro growth stuff, was the
right,
anti growth stuff.
right.
So you even saw it like take junk fees. So
Yeah,
when the Department of Transportation wrote the rule for what is now kind of in jeopardy
yeah,
around transparency around airfares specifically, airline fees specifically, they specifically noted that this law has been kicking around, this potential rule has been kicking around for years. And the Trump administration, right early in its administration, did an executive order, let's reduce regulations. And that was one of the things that went away. And
right.
that's one of the things that would, so based on that, I mean, no one has commented specifically about it, but
Yeah.
you would think that would go away this time too, based on that.
Isn't this one of the few like bipartisan thing?
Yeah.
Doesn't everybody want junk fees to go away? I mean, there are only a few of them. Let's hold on to them where we get them, where both sides of the aisle seem to be in
Yeah.
agreement.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's such a good note. I mean, I have no idea what happened there. Like, I don't think Donald Trump came out and said like, I want junk fees and like
yeah,
specifically targeted that one. It was
yeah,
kind of caught up in a very broad regulatory, just trying to roll back regulations.
yeah.
But the administration, the airline industry has fought this rule. They've sued it. It's currently blocked. It was going to go into effect at the end of this month. I don't see how that happens now. And if Trump were to win, I can't imagine. I don't know. It would feel at risk of not going
Yeah.
through. I would think. I don't know exactly
And
what's going to happen.
right. And this was one of Biden's like babies. Like, every time you watch the State of the Union, this junk fees seem to come up.
It was, but let's hold on here.
Yeah,
So that's totally within the FTC's control right now for their own
right.
rule, and they haven't passed the rule yet. And as you
Yeah.
know from our editorial meetings every morning,
Yes.
we're watching for this
Every
rule.
every day.
Yeah.
But we have
So
no reason to think that Kamala Harris, or a Harris administration, I should say, would back away from what the Biden
no,
administration has already started.
no, of course not. And
Yeah.
importantly, I do want to get back to the idea. This has been a very strong Department of Transportation, right? A
Right.
very
Under Pete Buttigieg.
under
Yeah.
Pete Buttigieg, right?
Yeah.
Both in terms of, if we're talking about regulations, certainly on fees, they've launched an inquiry, which is a vague term. We don't know exactly what's going to come of it, but into looking at
Yeah.
loyalty programs of the major airlines. They've been very strict on mergers and acquisitions. They've blocked 2 JetBlue things, one with Spirit, one with American Airlines. They did allow uh, Alaska Hawaiian merger to go through, but with
Yep.
conditions, which is not common, which is not something we're familiar with from past Department of Transportations. So, they'll
Let's
continue,
see.
I would think. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So let's take a break there. We'll come back. We'll kind of go outside the US and talk about everything else that's going on. Welcome back, everybody, to the Skift Travel Podcast. Now, my producer, Jose, just dropped me a note. He said apparently there was another 2 incumbents who faced off in the U.S. presidential elections. Teddy Roosevelt, who had been president from 1901 to 1908, ran for a 3rd term in 1912 against William H. Taft, who won the election in 1908. So, interesting little factoid there.
And Jose here jumping in.
Hi, Jose.
Hi there. Hey, everyone. Great conversation so far. Fun fact about this election with Teddy Roosevelt, he actually split the Republican ticket that year and started the Bull Moose Party to run against Taft, who had previously been his protege. Don't think anything like that's going to happen this time, but I thought that was pretty interesting.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, goodbye, Jose. All right, so Lex, let's get back to it. So we're going to move outside the U.S. now. So we have 2 major global conflicts going on: one in Ukraine and one in the Middle East. How are these major travel companies adjusting their corporate strategy to deal with what is kind of a relatively long war that's been going on in Ukraine, and the Middle East conflict, which is almost at a year and change right now?
I mean, it's been very isolated. The impact's been very isolated, right? So in the case of Russia, Ukraine, you've had flight issues. So like U.S. airlines can't fly over Russian airspace. That's creating a lot of issues in how they compete with Chinese airlines, which can.
Because they can. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. In terms of the Middle East, again, it's very localized. So we have this on again, off again, who's canceling flights to Israel. Cruise companies, I know Carnival even just yesterday released earnings and talked about how it's changed its routes or the cruises it offers in the Middle East. But then again, stresses this is very small for us and it's not having a huge impact.
Right.
So everything has been very contained, I would say. And you have it, and you can just see growth has kept up, earnings have kept up, et cetera. Big question. I know you're about to ask. And so is it about to get less local and more, escalate and widen? Yeah.
So we're recording this right now on Tuesday, October 1st. I'm sure most people who have, at about 1:00 in the afternoon Eastern time, I'm sure most people listening to the podcast got a series of alerts on their phones, just like we did a few hours ago, that make us think that things may change over the next few days. So it's a bit of a weird time, right? Like I can't remember the last time that we kind of sat here on the verge of what could be a boots on the ground war that was not localized,
Right.
that was outside, bringing in outside groups from the area that it's based.
And it's especially tough
here.
And it's just right. And it's especially tough to do reporting on it because no one exactly knows the answer. So I was speaking with Josh Corder, our fantastic reporter based in Dubai, and he's at a conference. He was at a conference and listening to executives from
Yeah.
hotel companies. He was listening to tourism ministers in the region. For now, they all say we're not changing anything. We're business as usual. Who knows if that if that
Yeah.
changes, and these things can change so quickly, and how they do their
Right.
business changes quickly. But for now, that's the kind of stuff we're hearing.
So trade policies are often influenced by politics, and depending upon who wins the U.S. election, that will have some fairly significant international trade implications, tariffs, bilateral agreements, how other nations react to that. Talk to us a little bit about how you see that coming into play in 2025.
I mean, there's no question that Trump likes to, he likes to pick fights
Yeah,
and isn't shy. The Look, we did tariffs. Trump did tariffs. I wrote any number of stories in 2016 saying how it would be inflationary. There wasn't inflation.
yeah,
Um, this time, the proposal is to do even more tariffs, 20% across the board. Would that be problematic? Yeah, it would be. And but again, the thinking is maybe that doesn't happen, or we always begin much more extreme.
yeah,
That doesn't happen. I'm also just mindful of the fact, just as someone who dealt with a lot of forecasts back then. I don't know how. I'm sure you remember this too, Sarah, but I probably edited and published dozens of stories that said Trump is ahead in the polls, stock market is down. The night of that election night, markets were tanking. And then I
yeah,
personally remember 4 a.m. having to publish the story because no one else was around, that said, wait, markets just went up again. And so everyone was
yeah.
wrong. So we just can't, these predictions are very problematic. And I'm just a little scarred.
Same,
Yeah.
same. Yeah, I distinctly remember that as well. Um, and the other thing is since that time, over the last, almost decade, the markets have just been strange.
Hmm.
A lot of things have have happened that where people said it was going to go one way. And when I say people, I mean like really smart people who make it their life's work to call these things, and it just hasn't happened that way. So we're like economists, pollsters, we're in a bit of a
I,
situation
I
of,
have
of
to,
limbo, aren't we?
I have to look it up. Wasn't there a headline that was like 100% chance of recession? It was
Yes,
like
there
literally
was
said 100.
something like that. Yes, exactly right. And yeah, we all can look at our 401ks
Yeah,
and smile right now.
right.
Exactly. But going back to the more international conflicts,
Mm-hmm.
it makes me think a lot about oil, supply chain, shipping. These were things that, well, not oil so much, but supply chain. These are things that still haven't come back to normal, I guess, since the pandemic. It's still, a thorn in the side, especially of airlines. If we have an increasingly um, unstable geopolitical environment out there in the world, how do you think that the travel community that relies a lot on, parts and things and oil is going to react to kind of less stability?
The supply chains one of the biggest things hurting, it hasn't hurt yet. One of the big things when you hear travel executives talk in aviation specifically is where's our Boeing planes, right?
Right,
So the Boeing issue isn't related to supply chain, but
right.
so they're already hurting. There's already this supply crunch. And so if you compound that, I'm pretty sure, and I need to go look it up, but Airbus CEO talked about tariffs
Yeah,
specifically and the impact of that. Uh, yeah, it's very tenuous, it's very fragile, and when we talk about financial markets, everything really is priced for perfection right now. So the
right.
kinds of threats you're talking about, I think, are imperfect, and you would start to feel it, and you would start to, I'm sure there would be ripple effects from that.
So I guess the big question then, and we've touched on it on quite a bit in this conversation, and it's kind of like we're all dancing around it, but maybe it's because the CEOs are.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a lot of unknown out there right now, and the street business hates that. They
Mm-hmm.
hate that, you know? And so I guess why is it not causing more stress
Mm-hmm.
out there? Why do they seem to be ignoring it? What's going to happen? Like what, situation or combination of imperfect things has to go on in order for there to be an actual big dent in the travel sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because, again, this idea of divided government. So
Yeah,
we won't, Trump won't get to do 20% across the board tariffs. Harris won't get to tax unrealized capital gains, which, is very problematic. And so no one's going to get to do what they want. And then so from a CEO perspective, from an investor perspective, you get into very familiar territory. You're like, okay, maybe tax rates go up a little bit. Maybe there's some regulations that we can deal with. And all of that is very familiar. It's a playbook they know how to manage through. And as long as you don't
compromise.
At
least in the U.S. sense. Yeah.
Right. And so those things a CEO can manage through. Usually what you'll hear if you listen to a Jamie Dimon, who's not a travel executive, but very important.
I don't know. Yeah.
Right.
I think maybe you could call him that these days, but anyway.
Sure. But usually what you'll hear is just tell us the rules of the game, right? Just tell us what they are, and we, our CFO, the CFO, the CEO, we could manage through it. It's only, and you were just talking about uncertainty, it's only if it's just like, all right, now we have no idea. What is it you're going to do exactly?
Yeah.
Everything else, these industry can get through.
Right. It's not like we haven't done it before.
Yeah.
History we can take a look back, see what worked, what didn't,
mm-hmm.
And make the way through. All right. Thank you, Lex, for joining us today. Again, if you have questions for either Seth or I, podcast@skift.com. Send your written or video questions there. We love to get them, and we may answer them on a future episode or podcast. Thanks very much, everybody. We will see you next week. Thanks, Lex.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for listening to the Skift Travel Podcast. Wherever you're listening, please make sure to subscribe. If you like what you're hearing, rate us 5 stars or leave us a positive review. It really helps get the word out about us, our podcast, and make sure that we can still continue to bring it to you free of charge every week.
If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell as well. That way you'll know every time we have a new episode.